Hey guys, and welcome to my review for The Rings of Power Episode 6, Udûn. Well, quite a bit happened in this one, and it was certainly more exciting than other episodes, but overall I still wasn't very impressed, and think they massively fell short of what I expected from the most expensive show ever made. However, it certainly wasn't all bad, and there was one part in particular I really genuinely enjoyed, so much so that I've actually gone back and rewatched those scenes over again for fun, which is the first time I've done that with scenes from this show. Naturally, that'll be my top moment of the night, but before getting there, let's start with what I felt was the fifth best moment of the episode, and that was the conversation about the Vala Yavana between Arendir and Bronwyn before the battle. Although I don't think they actually mentioned her name, I really enjoyed hearing Arendir talk about the Vala who watches over growing things, referencing Yavana, the Queen of Earth and giver of fruits. There wasn't much to this scene, and I'm not very invested in their relationship, so it was really only this brief reference that I actually enjoyed. But it nonetheless stood out to me because Yavana and her husband, Aule the Smith, are one of my favorite couples in the Lord of the Rings universe, mostly because of the insight we get into their relationship during a conversation they had in the Silmarillion, which led to the creation of the Ents. None of this has anything to do with the scene in this show, but whenever I read or hear about Yavana, my mind always goes back to that great conversation she had with her husband, which started with Yavana congratulating Aule for creating the dwarven race, but also making it clear he should not have hidden it from her, because now the dwarves will only love what Aule loves, and will have little reverence for the wildlife under her domain. Aule then reminded her this would be true of humans and elves as well, since they would all need to eat and build settlements. Fearing the loss of her beloved creations, Yavana went to Manwë, king of the Valar, and asked if anything could be done to protect plant life specifically, since animals could at least run away and defend themselves. This then led to the creation of the Ent race, shepherds of the trees acting as guardians over the forests of Middle-earth. Happy and excited by this development, Yavana returned to her husband, who was busy with his smith work, and she started to brag about the Ents, warning that his children the dwarves should beware, as her creations now had protectors. But Aule just continued his smith work, and coolly replied, "Nonetheless, they will have need of wood." Moving on to the number 4 spot, I went with Arendir refusing to surrender the sword key to Adar. I was really worried he was going to break and give up the information when they threatened his partner, but I was very happy and relieved to see he acted like an elf warrior should, putting the needs of the many over his own desires. I was also equally happy to see the son breaking and giving up the key to save his mother, because that's how I would expect a human child to act when their parent is in danger. Both did what they had to do, and I was thoroughly impressed with their resolve. I also want to say that while I think most of the acting on this show is quite average and sometimes worse than that, the man playing Arendir for me is one of the better actors, as I think he portrays a Sylvan elf quite well, with the right blend of fighting and survival skills coupled with a more down-to-earth demeanor, unlike the more highbrow Sindar and Noldor elves of the West. For the third best moment of the episode, I chose the final Southland scene where Adar succeeded and the volcano erupted. I wasn't really a fan of this plotline in general, the idea of there being a key to transform the Southlands into Mordor, but putting that aside, this scene was very visually impressive. I really thought those dark clouds spreading across the land looked amazing, and I'm looking forward to seeing the transformation. The name of this episode, Udûn, means hell in the Sindarin language, which makes sense as a title considering what happened. But it's interesting to note that it was also one of the names for Utumno, the original fortress of Morgoth, which is why in the Lord of the Rings movies, Gandalf calls the Balrog Flame of Udûn, because the Balrogs once lived in Utumno. In the books, Mount Doom was created by Morgoth in the First Age, allowing Mordor to become a place of darkness, which was then chosen as the home of Sauron in the Second Age, specifically so he could have access to Mount Doom where he forged the One Ring of Power. So while that part is different from the show, Mount Doom actually did erupt during the Second Age, in 3429 SA, and although this was not its first eruption and did not significantly transform the region, it was the first eruption witnessed by the people of Gondor, who then named it Mount Doom. For the number 2 spot, I went with 2 scenes that shared a connection, and that's when Adar performed and Arendir talked about the elven ritual before battle, planting seeds and repeating, "New life in defiance of death." The main reason I enjoyed this so much was because it was when Bronwyn repeated those words while talking to Arendir that I realized who Adar really was. I don't know why this didn't occur to me before, maybe because I was so hopeful that Adar was Sauron, but when I heard those words spoken a second time, it all came together, and I realized Adar must be the first orc ever created. Suddenly it all made sense, the orcs calling him father and having a sentimental connection, him looking like an elf, and various hints that he was not Sauron but a possible rival. This was the moment it all clicked in my mind and I finally realized he was the first orc. Or, like they said later, at least one of the first orcs. But what was most shocking about these scenes was my realization that I actually think this idea is pretty cool. Throughout this series, the actor playing Adar has pretty much been the best thing on this show for me. He is the only character I like, the only one I care about, and he somehow manages to take subpar dialogue and make it utterly captivating. And because of all that, I was desperate to see him be revealed as Sauron, because quite frankly, no other possibility seemed the least bit interesting to me. I have absolutely no interest in seeing Halbrand, one of the most boring characters on this show, or anyone else for that matter, being revealed as Sauron. So because of this, I was sure that whatever they had planned for Adar, if he was anyone other than Sauron, I would hate it. But to my surprise, I really legitimately enjoyed this reveal, which was made even better during what I chose as the best moment of the night, when a captured Adar explained himself and his mission to Galadriel. I haven't checked to see what other people think of this episode yet, and my guess is there will probably be people who don't like this reveal. But for me, this idea about Adar being the first orc, and basically fighting for their rights as living beings, has potential to be absolutely fascinating. And while none of these scenes or storylines are from the books, they touch on one of the more interesting and controversial topics in this world, and that's the origins of the Uruk, meaning orc in Black speech. So, the most popular and well-known theory for the creation of orcs states that Morgoth captured Eastern elves long before the rising of the sun, twisting and breeding them to create a subservient race that would follow his every command. Morgoth hated that he couldn't create his own beings with spirits of independent thought like humans, elves, and dwarves, since this was a power reserved solely for Eru, the creator of the universe. And so Morgoth decided to take beings which already existed to twist and corrupt until they were his loyal servants. Therefore, it is said the orcs were made in mockery of the elves, and this is the story published in the Silmarillion. However, Tolkien himself wasn't sold on the idea, because there were deeper, problematic implications, largely stemming from the idea that elves have immortal souls. Therefore, if the orcs are their children, shouldn't they have immortal souls as well? So, aren't they just a different kind of elf? Does that mean orcs go to the halls of Mandos after death, and can even redeem themselves? Tolkien wasn't comfortable with that idea, and while the elf origin remained a possibility, he also came up with a number of other possible origin stories, including orcs bred from corrupted men, orcs made from stone, orcs as intelligent animals, and even orcs bred from lesser Maiar spirits that served Morgoth. Since Tolkien died before making a final decision, the issue has been left up for debate among fans of this universe. And while most will still defer to the corrupted elf origin theory from the Silmarillion, the idea is fertile ground for discussion, as demonstrated in the scene between Adar and Galadriel, when Adar tried to defend his children, claiming that their elf origin makes them children of Eru, and thus have a right to live and survive in this world. Galadriel disagreed with this idea, as will many others, which for me is an excellent source of debate for characters in future episodes. Personally, I've always been partial to the elf origin theory, and the way it makes sense for me is that while the first generation of orcs like Adar did have immortal souls that would go to the halls of Mandos after death, their twisted offspring, born from dark magic and Morgoth's corruption, would not. For me, that is a perfectly acceptable answer, but for many others it's not, including Tolkien himself, who was never satisfied with the elf origin theory. So those were my top 5 moments of the night, and as I mentioned, I really did enjoy those scenes with Adar. And while I'm still not thrilled that some other character, possibly Halbrand, will play Sauron, at least my favorite actor wasn't entirely wasted, and is playing a character I actually enjoy. Unfortunately, this one aspect of the episode, in addition to the visuals, were pretty much the only things I liked, with everything else falling short of capturing my interest. Some of the most noticeable criticisms for me started with Galadriel talking to Isildur about humility at the start of the episode. I nearly burst out laughing when I heard her try to encourage humility, since she is by far the most arrogant, prideful person on this show. This isn't a big deal, but it was a pretty bad way to start the episode in my opinion. Then there was the scene where Bronwyn nearly died and I was nearly impressed, as I thought for a moment they might actually kill her off, which would have been a very brave and bold choice to make. It also would have mirrored a story from the books I've referenced before when talking about Bronwyn and Arendir, how in the books one of Galadriel's brothers died in battle before he could marry the human woman he loved. I thought they might be doing something similar, where the human woman dies before she can marry the elven man. But I was wrong, and she was saved and I lost all interest. Now let's talk about the battle scenes, which I really did not much enjoy. To be fair, I will say that if this was any other show, I think these battle scenes would have been absolutely fine. And in fact, this battle reminded me of other lower budget fantasy shows. But for me, that's the problem. This is the most expensive show ever made, and the big climactic battle near the end of season 1 is a small-scale village skirmish between a few dozen orcs and humans before 300 Númenóreans ride in and conquer the village in just a few moments. Honestly, this is the type of battle I would expect to see in the very first episode of a show, to create a little bit of interest, and if that were the case, I would be fine with it. But this was nowhere near large enough or impressive enough for this late into the season, especially coming from the most expensive show ever made. Moving beyond the battles, there was also the fact that no one, including Galadriel, tried to check to see what was in the cloth wrappings carried by Adar. This was absolutely absurd. How could no one think to check and see what was there? Laughably preposterous. So that's it for my review of The Rings of Power Episode 6, Udûn. Overall, although I did have many criticisms, the Adar scenes, impressive visuals, and faster pace still made it one of the best episodes so far, so I'll give it a 6 out of 10. But what did you guys think of this one? And more specifically, what did you think of the Adar reveal? I'm curious to see what you all think, so let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out my spoiler-free Prelude to the Rings of Power video, as well as my spoiler-filled videos about the Rings of Power, Kingdom of Numenor, and Second Age, which go into the events of this period in detail. Links found below. So that's all for now, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and check out the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.